Welcome back to Face the States. We've heard from the side working to pass question 3. Now we'll turn it over to the opposition. Danny Thompson with the Nevada State AFL-CIO is here now to talk about that. Danny, thank you for coming on the show.
Thank you.
Okay, so start us off generally. Why are you opposed to question 3?
Every state that has done this has seen a rise in the residential rates, and not insignificant rises, significant rises. Since 2000, between 2002 and 2013, California saw a 35% increase in residential rates. During that same period of time, Nevada saw a 25% decrease. In fact, there's another decrease coming right now to NV Energy users. So the first reason is rates will go up. There's no question, and I have the rates for every state in the United States. We're currently below the national average, and the states that have done that have seen, some of these states are 19 cents a kilowatt hour. We right now are 8.8 cents a kilowatt hour. And so the first thing is that we don't want to see rates to increase. The second reason is this is a constitutional amendment, and to put something like this in the Constitution is a huge mistake. And the reason is this, it's a 5-year process, 2 election cycles, and once it's in the Constitution, you can't take it out. The legislature can't change it once it's in there, without another vote of the people, you can't make any adjustments. So once this is done, and there is some change, you can't change it.
But the legislature would be responsible for writing up the details to begin with, correct?
They would write the details, but in effect, in a deregulated market, it would impact renewable energy because there would be no portfolio standard. There'd be no way to enforce it. And these companies that would be providing this power would be somewhere else, and they would be using the cheapest version of power that they could provide, which is coal. And you wouldn't be able to enforce the portfolio standard on these companies.
Why not? I don't understand why you couldn't put provisions in place, have a regulatory board.
In a regulatory board, in a regulatory system, there is a portfolio standard in the law. I don't know how you would enforce this on some company who's selling it at the lowest price point that's not in the state. That's going to be a trick. And if you somehow change that, who's going to pay for this giant PUC? Because currently the PUC is in a regulated monopoly and would have control over a single company. If you open this up to every provider in the United States, how would you control that? And the companies that want to do this are very sophisticated operations. They have people that would be buyers and would buy power at the lowest possible rate. Residential users are not sophisticated in this. We're worried about door-to-door salesmen coming around and trying to sell you on some deal, and without a regulatory body to control that, you're going to have fraudulent things happen. You're going to have people sell them things that they don't need or they can't do and tell people whatever they want to tell them. And so it just doesn't make any sense, either from a price perspective or a renewable energy perspective, or changing the Constitution. The reason that you don't want to do this, the legislature makes mistakes, and the legislature then can go back and fix these mistakes. If this is done wrong, there's no fixing this. You would have to go, once it's implemented and they make those changes, you would have to go back to a vote of the people twice to make a change.
Now, energy monopolies have been called outdated. They were put in place a long time ago before other sources of energy were really available. And it's been said that the monopoly discourages renewable energy, clean energy, which is obviously a direction that Nevada wants to move in. So what's your response to that?
Currently, NV Energy has 1,000 megawatts of solar in the desert in Las Vegas, utility-grade plants that are the largest in the world, and they continue to provide that to us. And so this energy that's being used here today is partially supplied by solar. We have a plant in Tonopah that is a solar plant that heats molten salt and stores it underground at night, and then at night it's pumped above ground and runs a boiler. And so it's renewable energy. We have geothermal plants in northern Nevada. And so that standard is in place, and they're well ahead of meeting that standard, and they're doing a great job right now.
Now, the Public Utilities Commission recently made a decision that did have the consequence of driving out rooftop solar companies for individual users. If we're talking about families, homeowners, that sort of thing, who would be affected by this, the PUC made this decision that drove them out. What would be the solution to bring them back in, if not deregulation?
In fact, that's not true. The PUC made a decision that said, because solar has never paid for itself, and certainly rooftop solar and distributive solar has not done that. And so in order to make it attractive, they put a subsidy in place in the legislature, in effect forcing the company to pay a higher rate than the power is worth. All the PUC did, they said, if you are a rooftop solar person who's net metering, you can only regain what the power is worth. And so at the time, they were forced to pay retail to a homeowner at about 12 cents a kilowatt hour, when NV Energy was producing it at these plants in Las Vegas for about 4. So they had to pay 8 cents above what it was worth. The PUC, all the PUC said was, you can only sell it for what it's worth, and it reduced it to 4 cents. Now that didn't drive anybody out. The people who left weren't so interested in rooftop solar. They were selling leases on those energy. Then they bundled these leases together, like the mortgage industry did, and sell them on Wall Street and to investors, and that's what's changed. Those are no longer attractive instruments financially, but you can still go and put a net metering array on your roof and still get the 4 cents a kilowatt hour. You're just not going to be subsidized by everybody else. And the reason they didn't want to be subsidized, if you're a renter or a senior and you can't afford one of those things, why should you pay the 8 cents to someone like me who could afford it? And that was the ruling of the PUC.
Okay. Well, it did have the ultimate effect that most rooftop solar companies did move out of Nevada. I think it's understandable that most people would want them to come back. Better to have a flourishing solar industry here in one of the sunniest states in the nation, right? So what's the alternative then to reattract? I guess what I'm asking is, how do you bring that back? How do you make sure that it does flourish?
They didn't all leave. Bombard Electric in Las Vegas, there are companies in Las Vegas and other places that are still doing that. It just, all it did was say it's not fair for me to subsidize you when you can afford to have that. You can only recover what it's worth. And so the reason those companies left was because they weren't able to sell the leases anymore, and the leases were what, the financial instruments were what made it attractive.
Okay. Now going back to deregulation, some Nevada businesses have already gotten away from getting their power from NV Energy. Yes. They're in favor of this. It's been called business friendly to give businesses more choices. What's your response to that when Nevada's trying to attract more businesses in?
Currently, and I lobbied this bill as a lobbyist because that's what I do, a user can leave NV Energy. AB 661 said if you use 1 megawatt, you have the ability to leave the system and buy on the open market. 1 megawatt user is a Walmart or a laundromat, or this building here certainly uses more than 1 megawatt. The only proviso was, though, that if you leave, you have to pay the stranded costs that are in the system. And the stranded costs are this. When you built this building, NV Energy had to put in systems to provide energy to you, and they paid for that. All the users paid for that. And what this said, what AB 661 says, if you use a megawatt, you can leave and you can buy on the open market, but you have to repay the other people for the cost of what was the infrastructure that was put in for you. And in the case of a large hotel, it's millions of dollars. I mean, in some cases, $80 million. And they don't want to pay that stranded cost. They want us to be stuck with it. And in this system, if you deregulate, NV Energy will still be here. There'll be a wires company, but they are going to have to be paid for those stranded costs somehow. And that alone is going to drive your rates up by itself. The other thing that this impacts are co-ops, because it applies to everyone. And in a co-op, it's a nonprofit operation. There are four in Nevada, at least four. If the big users fall out of a co-op, it falls apart. And I don't know how you solve that because irrigators farmers who use pumps to pump water are the big users, and they would be the ones who would leave, leaving the residential customers in the co-op, and it wouldn't work at that point.
Okay, well, we've got 30 seconds left. So what's your final message to voters? What do you want them to take away?
Do not pass this. You'll be sorry. Your rates will go up, and you won't be able to change it. And it would be a deregulation disaster for residential users.
Okay, Danny, thank you so much
Thank
for
you so
your time.
much.
I sure
Thank
appreciate
you.
it. Well, that is it for this episode of Face the State. But for more information on all of this or to see past episodes, including the other ballot questions, just head to our website. That's ktvn.com. Thank you so much for being with us. We'll see you next week.